Well, welcome. Thank you very much for coming along to my presentation. My name is Ian Turner, and a number of you may be aware that, in fact, I was hoping to speak to you in a very different circumstance just last month as one of the joint chairs of ICCE to be held in Sydney. Now, we're very pleased that we've rescheduled that to mid-2022, and I'll tell you more about it at the end. But first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about a project that I'm involved in with a number of partners who are listed on this slide here, where we're working together to establish a national scale beach erosion early warning system to be applied within Australia, and that's appropriate to open coast Australian conditions, predominantly on sandy coastlines. So for those of us who live on the eastern seaboard of Australia, this was what we woke up to a few years ago in early June in 2016. What we refer to locally as an east coast low impacted about 1,000 kilometres of coastline, resulting in quite dramatic coastal erosion. And this actually is Narrabeen Collaroy Beach, and there's nothing quite like a pool on a beach to attract significant attention, both in the local and then very rapidly the international media. And the type of headlines we were seeing were coastal erosion, small pool smashes beach. As I say, a swimming pool ending up on a beach is very attractive to cameras. In fact, as a little aside, this is not the first time on this stretch of coastline that a pool has ended up on a beach. This is Bilgola Beach, which just happens to be where I live, which is only a couple of kilometres north of Narrabeen. And in fact, there was a pool on the beach in the mid-70s. But the interesting thing about this storm in 2016 is it was a surprise to many, but not a surprise to us. This is some work of my UNSW colleague, Mitchell Harley, and this is NOAA WaveWatch 3 forecast, 5 days in advance. And we were seeing this storm peaking for our coastline, not particularly big waves, around 6.5 metres significant wave height. But what was very unusual for us was this northeasterly direction. On our coast, the waves are predominantly from the southeast, and so we were watching this storm closely. Actually, 4 days out, it kind of looked like the storm was fading, but 3 days out, it started to come back up again. Now we're in excess of significant wave heights of 5 metres, and significantly, most significantly for us, continuing to be in these easterly, northeasterly direction. And 2 days prior, 1 day prior, and then in fact the storm hit and did cause this quite dramatic damage. What was important, key to us in watching this event, was that a handful of us researchers knew actually a week in advance that this event was likely to happen, but very few people who really needed to know had been informed. And importantly, within Australia, there's currently no mechanism with which we can tell people that there's a storm approaching. So coastal erosion in the Australian context, well, why does it matter? Well, Australia is a distinctly coastal focused nation. The vast majority of the population actually lives in the coastal zone. And there have been various attempts at costing roads, commercial buildings, residential property. And particularly for us Australians, there's enormous cultural and environmental value of beaches. And we value beaches very highly, as do other nations. And it's actually estimated that the amenity and storm protection provided by beaches, sandy beaches nationally, is in the range of somewhere in the $4 to $10+ million for every kilometre of sandy shoreline. Now, we're lucky here in Sydney in that inherited from Andy Short in the mid-70s, 15 years ago, my group at the University of New South Wales took over the long-term Narrabeen Collaroy Beach monitoring program. We kind of do surveys that Andy did, but we spend a bit more on our technology. And this is just an example of 40 years around 5 standard transect lines. We've got beach profiles, and then just a time series of beach width in this case. And we see a lot of interesting things in these data. We see periods of time when the whole beach is getting wider. We see periods of time when one end is getting wider, the other end is getting narrower. But actually, through 40+ years, we see no net change. But very significantly, and this is typical of East Australian coast, up to 80 metres variability in beach width. So this is a developed coastline. That's particularly important to emergency managers and coastal managers. And actually, if we have a look at this, this storm from 2016, it was the largest erosion event that we've recorded in 40 plus years, over 100 cubic metres per metre shoreline of storm demand. But noticeably, if we look, this is time and significant wave height, if we look at actually the storm and compare it to just a couple of other, well, one storm only a year prior and then a storm about a decade prior, you know, we're not up there in terms of the largest significant wave heights. In terms of total storm energy, certainly not up there with the largest storm. In fact, it's only really in terms of wave heights, the 1 in 5 year event we saw in 2016. But very significantly, it's this direction. It was from an unusual direction, and that enabled wave energy to get into embayments along the east coast of Australia, which don't normally experience this high wave energy, and caused all the damage along 1,000 kilometres of coastline. So the lessons learnt were that a few university researchers knew the likely impact of the storm was coming a week in advance, but the subtleties of a slightly different wave direction, rather than necessarily being a big storm, was understandably missed by the wider coastal management community and emergency services. And very importantly, presently in Australia, there's no nationally or state coordinated coastal erosion early warning system within to which this information can be fed and actioned as required. So this has led to the Australian government actually funding us to look at, do the underpinning science to establish the framework for a national scale coastal erosion early warning system for Australia, and then for the Bureau of Meteorology to then operationalise. These are our partners providing us a lot of advice and input and design on how we do it and why we do it. And we've established two key components to focus on. The first one is a tier level regional coverage, and here we're talking about an entire impacted region from a storm, wherever that may be around the Australian coast. We're talking hundreds of kilometres typically. And this is a first pass forecasting, but with a spatial resolution of every 100 metres along shore. And then a tier 2, more localised, high resolution, process-based erosion modelling at pre-identified erosion hotspots of the actual storm demand, beach retreat, and more quantitative metrics. This is the conceptual framework which we're now working towards, and I should say we're at about the midpoint in this project now. The first, of course, is met ocean forecasts, rolling forecasts, 7 to 0 day time horizon of storm waves and water levels. We need to know something about the pre-storm conditions along the coastline and looking at a range of techniques to establish this. And then two parallel modelling approaches. One is this tier 1 forecast of the location and type of the localised hazards within an impacted region. And then the tier 2 ensemble forecast is quantitative forecasts, quite site specific, of things like beach narrowing, erosion, demand. And then most importantly, is where we're putting a lot of effort now, is then into the effective and timely delivery of warning information, how to do that and where to target that information. We've established 2 test case regions. We're working with the University of Western Australia here. So we have a test case region on the east coast of Australia and the west coast of Australia, and within those localised hotspots. So we're working in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, quite different drivers, because we're really looking at a national scale rollout of this system. Now, I'll be brief. The Med-Ocean forecast, we're working closely with the Bureau of Meteorology, and Stefan Ziger is a key player with us within the Bureau. The Australian Bureau of Meteorology's operational forecast system presently doesn't provide the coastal resolution that we require. Stefan and his team have now developed a new high resolution hindcast and forecast system, which actually brings wave information into the coast for us. And look, there's details here. It's based upon implementation of WaveWatch 3. It's forced by the Bureau's NWP system, and it's nested within a global configuration of Auswave. There's details of this within a paper, and I'm sure Stefan would be pleased to provide more information. Now, one key aspect is we need to know what the coastline looks like prior to the storm arriving. So at our test regions, our test sites, we've got airborne LiDAR. We think that's now quite realistic to have available for many coastal regions. And for the hotspot to know immediate pre-storm conditions at sites of interest, we're looking at using fixed LiDAR, fixed cameras, and particularly now satellite systems to establish, for example, immediately pre-storm beach width, which in addition to prior airborne LiDAR gives a pretty good sense of what the coastline looks like now. The tier 1 forecasts on the regional, but with 100-metre resolution, is really where we focused a lot of energy. And of course, we're not the first to think about this. We're really learning a lot from developments underway, the USGS, RISC-IT in Europe, and looking carefully at work that can guide us. Now, Salinger's work on the storm impact scale for Barrier Islands, really developed for the east coast of the US, has been extremely informative. But in the context of an Australian system, we have some differences. On the US East Coast, typically where the system, a wide continental shelf generating large storm surges and less so wave energy hitting the coast, so elevated water levels are really a key driver. Whereas for us on much of the exposed both east and west and southern Australian coastline, we have a narrow continental shelf, and really storm surge is not a major player. We're really talking about wave energy. So Chris Lehman here at University of New South Wales has developed for us now an erosion, a new storm impact matrix that includes both the flooding hazards more associated with wide, shallow continental shelves, and then erosion hazard associated with deeper, higher energy coasts, and now developed this two-dimensional approach where both water levels and waves arriving at the coast can be incorporated into a hazard matrix. And this can be applied both every 100 metres along shore, along hundreds of kilometres of coastline, and then zooming in, actually, as I say, the resolution is at 100 metres along shore. Chris is going to talk about this work in some detail in session number 12, Hazards and Risks. So please do attend Chris's session a little later, and he'll tell you all about the development and evaluation of this approach. For hotspot locations or regionally representative locations, we want to do more, we're targeting more quantitative forecasts. We are using X-Beach, and we're looking at quantitative parameters like storm demand and shoreline reduction. But one of the challenges here is for X-Beach, we need to know knowledge of pre-storm bathymetry because it's a required boundary condition. So that's challenging because with 7 days notice, can we go out and survey? And the short answer is, for a national system, no, we can't. So we're looking at this very carefully, and another PhD student here at UNSW, Nash Matheen, is looking into this very closely. What he's been looking at is, we are lucky enough to have been mobilising and doing immediately pre-storm surveys for several years. We're looking now at various proxies. What can we use? Do we have to do that, or can we use a proxy? And key conclusions of Nash's work is that surveyed pre-storm bathymetry is not necessarily a prerequisite for accurate predictions of subaerial beach and dune erosion, but it's very important to undertake site-specific calibration. And once that's done, there are some suitable proxies for alternative bathymetry to use to get reliable erosion predictions. And Nash has a publication coming out in Coastal Engineering shortly, and look out for his presentation later today in session 7, where he'll talk about his work in considerably more detail. And then the final component, but actually where we're putting half the effort of the total project, is about what information to deliver, where to deliver it, and how to deliver it. And this is really the stage of the project that we're at now. We've made a very conscious decision to do a bottom-up design of the early warning system. So rather than us scientists kind of coming up with ideas and then presenting it to managers and emergency managers, coastal managers, we're actually presently going through a round of consultation, several rounds of consultation with emergency services, with coastal managers, both at our state and local level, establishing what information they need, how they use it, what they're currently using, what's their wish list. And we're now actually using that information to feed into the design of the early warning system of what information is provided, when it's provided, how do you deal with issues such as uncertainty in forecasts, and who should really target information to, and different types of information actually needs to be provided to different end users. So we're really in the depths of this at the moment. It is a very fascinating process, I have to say, to ask first rather than design first. We have made some key decisions, and Mandy Thran has joined our team at the University of New South Wales on behalf of the whole project team and is now leading this aspect of the work. We've established that Delft Views is our preferred platform now for forecasting moving forwards, and conveniently it's a platform that's already used within the Bureau of Meteorology within the flood warning space, so there's some efficiency in terms of future operatisation. And these are just some indicative ideas of where we're presently heading. This is at the tier 1, providing both regional and the local coverage. And this is the kind of product with 7, 6, 5, 4, 3 days out. As the wave and water level forecasts are updated, these get synthesized and simulated through Delft Views, with forecasts being produced. And you can see here, both as a regional manager and a local scale manager, getting updated information at 3 days, starting to identify some severely impacted regions, 2 days, 1 day out. So managers, emergency services, police, and the local coastal managers are having this information approaching on where to focus their efforts and where emergency measures may be required. And this is the day as the storm occurs. So look, thank you very much for coming along and listen. I look forward to interacting with you in some questions at the end of this. But I do want to just take a few moments now to talk about the conference that we will be holding in Sydney in 2 years' time. We were disappointed that ICCE 2020 couldn't proceed in September this year as planned, but we're really pleased now that 2022 is locked in. And some key dates, abstract submissions will be opening on the 1st of July next year. And we're pretty comfortable that by the conference in July 2022, so better part of 2.5 years away, we should be well and truly and comfortably in a position to all be gathering. And indeed, I'd like to suggest celebrating as a coastal engineering community, the opportunity to come together again and share each other's work face to face, and do all those valuable interactions that occur not only within the conference presentations, but all that interaction that we'll have during the week. We'll have short courses and a number of activities. So please mark this in your diary. Jump on the website to register your interest. And in fact, we have a virtual booth here at the VICCE for ICCE 2022 in Sydney. So register your interest. And I thoroughly look forward to seeing you in Sydney in 2022. And I'll end with a short video to hopefully attract you to come along and see us in 2.5 years' time. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to interacting with you in a few minutes' time.